everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
What a day, what a dollar.
That's for sure.
I'm actually disappointed in myself.
Why is that?
Because I didn't play any political games.
Well, I think it's funny that we did do a presidential-themed episode.
We did.
But we did it, I think, was it on President's Day? Is that why we did it?
Was it on President's Day? What episode was that?
It was episode 200, and it was on October 1st, 2023. President's Day is in February.
Yeah, it's just a random day. So episode 100? 200?
200.
Nice, episode 200. So if you're in the presidential spirit and want to listen to us talk about presidential games, I believe one of them is what would JFK do if he wasn't shot?
That's not what it was called. I think it was called...
No, it was not.
I was going to say it was called JFK Reloaded.
It's not. There is a game called JFK Reloaded.
There is, but it's not that game. We didn't talk about that.
It is
Re-elect JFK?
Yes, it is Re-elect JFK. JFK Reloaded is a first-person shooter. Re-elect JFK is a point-and-click simulation game where you're simulating being JFK. If you're in the presidential spirit, go back to episode 200 and listen to us talk about weird presidential games. But I did not. I was not playing presidential games. And Zach, I don't think you were either. So what were you playing, Zach?
Seth, recently I've been playing Minecraft PS1 Edition, which is a mod. It's a spooky, scary mod of the game Minecraft, everyone's favorite block placing game. And it's a mod that I learned about through some YouTubers that I was watching. One in particular, Sagan Hawks, did a video where he talked about it. But it changes a few things to the game to make it a bit creepier and also to give it an aesthetic similar to games of the era of the PS1. The game mod was designed in a way to be an alternate reality where if Minecraft hypothetically came out on the original PlayStation. So when you download the mod, there's even a little Word doc that contains photos of a hypothetical CD-ROM case with the cover and what the discs would have looked like. But it does things like making the render distance extremely low, adding in that kind of fog you'd expect to see from a low render distance. All of the textures are now changed to lower quality. It adds in kind of that warping distortion you get with PS1 graphics. Like when you're playing them on an emulator, you'll notice the graphics kind of have this little, almost like a little parallax distortion they get. It adjusts the music and the sound to have a bit more reverb, and it also adds in loading screens that are reminiscent of the PS1 style loading screens, complete with messages like insert disc 2 when you're going into a new section of the game. It's kind of neat, and it is a horror mod, so it does add some spooky, scary elements as well, such as audio things that happen. Sometimes objects will appear where they're not supposed to be, and there is a sanity meter, which is not kept visible to you, so you don't quite always know what your sanity level is, but there is a sanity meter, and if it gets too low, you become a bit more aware of some things that might be looking for you, such as creatures from the unknown. It's kind of a fun little experience. It's kind of a weird way to enjoy Minecraft in a way that I've never played it before. It's almost like stepping into an alternate reality of what if this game was real and also a horror game. What about you, Seth? What have you been recently playing?
So recently I've been playing The Sims 4, which I guess is funny because we will talk about sim adjacent things in this episode. But specifically on October 31st of 2024, The Sims released another expansion pack, which wouldn't be really, interesting, except that it was called Life and Death. And in the expansion pack, it unlocks the ability to play as dead Sims, which is interesting and also kind of a cool twist. And it also unlocks two different career paths. One of them is a mortuary person, and the other career path is the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper career path is an active work path. So that means you can control your sim while they're at work being the Grim Reaper. And I said, oh, this is going to be worth paying $34 or $40 or whatever the price of the expansion packs are nowadays. I said, that's definitely worth paying the price of an expansion pack to be the Grim Reaper. So I started the expansion pack. I built a character specifically to be the Grim Reaper. I loaded him into a house. I am not cheating for money, so my character is very poor. He doesn't have a lot of ambitions beyond being the Grim Reaper. He's also a wizard, so he's a Grim Reaper wizard. And he gets to live out his life being a Grim Reaper. And it's really fun because of an experience that I had that you can only have while playing The Sims. And that is my character went to work, and he really had had to use the bathroom. And so they went to work and they're like, we need to go get this body and you need to reap them. And I said, great, I have to use the potty. And they said, we have to go to this person's house now. And then I teleported to this stranger's house where the only person in the house was a dead person. So there was a dead person in the house and the Grim Reaper standing outside and me, my character, dressed as a Grim Reaper. I go into the house with my character and he still has to use the bathroom. I start doing some of the investigatory work that you need to do because you're still on a clock because you're working. So like, I'm like, oh, how did this person die? How did this happen? And then the bathroom need was too high. So then my little Sims guy went into this stranger's bathroom, this dead stranger's bathroom, and he proceeded to take a very long, as our father and NPR would say, an urgent haircut was required. As he was in there for quite some time doing his business. He washed his hands and then proceeded to go back and touch this dead guy. And that can only happen in The Sims, where you can really just have an experience where your Sim is all of a sudden like, oh, I really have to go to the bathroom. But yeah, so it's cool that you can play the Grim Reaper. You get told to do different tasks. You have to sometimes run around collecting souls. I like that you can also now play as a ghost. If you want, you can have an entire ghost house, just like living in a ghost mansion, which is kind of cool. So I haven't played around with a lot of the ghost mechanics, but I'm wondering if you could just like pass through things or possess things, which would be kind of cool. You can interact with people normally, but I wonder if it will add a second layer of play through it. So I'll have to check that out. But yeah, so that's Sims 4 Life and Death.
Cool. Seth, are you ready to get into today's topic?
I am ready to get into today's topic. I want to eventually do an episode talking about Crusader Kings and kind of like those type of games and how they came to be. But I kind of also wanted to talk about Paradox because as I started doing research into Crusader Kings, I started researching Paradox, and Paradox has a convoluted background to it. For a little while, there was like multiple paradoxes at the same time, which is, I guess, makes sense with their name. But like, there was just like, there was Paradox Entertainment, there was Paradox Interactive, there's Paradox Development Studio. Like, they're all different companies. Some are subsidiaries, some get spun off. So as you listen to this episode, just pay attention to what Paradox, we'll say Paradox a lot, but we'll usually say a word after that, and that will imply which particular company we're talking about. And I also do play a lot of their games. I think Crusader Kings is one of my highest playthrough games today, is the game that I play a lot of in today's world. I'm actually playing it, not right now, but like currently I'm playing it along with The Sims, two very time-sinky games. In the current game that I'm playing, I have a character who is the King of Portugal, and he united all of the Spanish thrones, so there is only one throne in Spain, and that is Portugal. So he has all the dukes of like Galicia and Castilla and Catalan and all those, they all report up to Portugal as the one true throne. I actually just started another game, because sometimes I get to a point where I like to just start new games, and I was playing the Sardinian king. So he was the king of Sardinia, which is the island that's outside of Italy. Anyway, so let's talk about Paradox Interactive, which is the company that published Crusader Kings, and there is Paradox Studio, which is the company underneath. So Paradox Interactive is also the parent company. It's the company that is in charge of the studio, since the studio is a subsidiary. But Paradox Interactive is currently based in Stockholm, Sweden. It's both a game publisher and a first-party developer. As of 22, they had 9 studios under its umbrella. They've since divested from 4 of them, and they're about at 5 right now, including a studio called Paradox Development Studio. There are also a range of owners and investors that own Paradox Interactive, since they are a publicly traded company, including Tencent, which is a very large company that owns a lot of things, and including Epic Game Launcher and all that stuff. They own 9.2% of the company. The primary stakeholder of Paradox, though, is a company called Wester Invest, which is a private equity company that is owned and run by a person by the name of Friedrich Wester. And we're going to talk a lot about Friedrich Wester because Friedrich Wester is also Paradox's CEO. and Paradox Interactive's founder. We'll get to why we consider him the founder of Paradox Interactive. So, but where did Paradox Interactive come from? Where did it actually get its start? So back in 1980, there was a Swedish company called Target Games, which was formed with the focus on creating role-playing books. And the founders saw the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, but they recognized a gap that localizing the content for Swedish audiences was essential for adaptation in the Swedish marketplace, but nobody was really doing it. So D&D was available in Sweden, but it wasn't as popular as it could be. So Target Games began producing role-playing books similar in format to D&D, which being they're just like stapled booklets in a box with some dice, which is how D&D was sold for years.
Right. Yeah.
Just stapled pamphlets with dice in a nice box that you can now pay like $100 for an original copy when they used to just give that stuff away. And they, in 1982, released their own stapled books with a box set, and that was for a tabletop RPG called Drakar och Demoner, which is horrible Swedish, and translates to Dragons and Demons, which is not Dungeons and Dragons, but it was often shortened to DOD. And this game would resonate with the Swedish market, and it would do well, and they would expand on this title, and they've actually released up to 6 editions of the game. They released at least 4 of them, I think, while they were still operating from 82 to 99, but they did like some Kickstarters and released some newer editions recently and stuff like that.
Well, they expanded their lineup with Mutant in 1984 and Cult in 1991. Mutant followed a similar structure to Drakar och Demoner, but instead of a fantasy setting, it took place in a post-apocalyptic Scandinavia filled with mutants. If there's one thing about Scandinavia that frightens me, it's all the mutants.
And I like that there's some like animal mutants. They're gonna be like Catman and stuff like that, not just like Fallout mutants.
Later versions would lean into a more cyberpunk style, and Cult was a completely different style of game altogether. It took a darker tone. It was a horror-themed game set in the modern world. It drew inspiration from Gnostic philosophy in films like Hellraiser, and was known for its intense, often violent themes, making it their most controversial release. In fact, 2 controversies that were related to Cult were the unfortunate suicide of a boy and the disappearance of another boy, which got related to Cult by the media. Now, this is something that also happened with D&D. There were stories of people who went missing. There was stories of people who killed themselves. And in fact, the kind of that mania about whether or not D&D is evil was actually Tom Hanks got his starring role in the movie Mazes and Monsters, which is a like educational horror film about a college-age boy who becomes addicted with Dungeons and Dragons and joins a cult. It's a weird movie, but it was one of Tom Hanks' first roles, which is just a fun fact. Now, Cult would get banned in Sweden because of the fact that it had this controversy tied to it, but that just made people want to play it more. When you ban something, it just becomes way more popular.
Especially for teenage boys who were the target demographic.
For sure. All 3 games, Drakar och Demoner, Mutant, and Cult, were developed under the Ivesprissel brand, which means adventure games in my poorly pronounced Swedish. Target Games would release additional role-playing games under the banner, including licensed and translated games relating to both Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. They also were involved in war games, collectible card games, generic source books, their own stores called Tradition, a magazine called Syncadus, and they provided translation for both guidebooks and fantasy novels, including Conan the Barbarian, and they also published 3 computer games. Now, since we're a gaming podcast, let's dive into those early computer games. In 1997, Target Games released Herrscher de Mir and Svi Rika, followed by Dragonfire: The Well of Souls in 2000. Herrscher de Mir is an economy strategy game about pirates, with a tone that's darker and grittier than the more colorful, adventurous vibe that you might get in a game like Sid Meier's Pirates.
Yeah, so have you ever played Sid Meier's Pirates?
Yeah.
This game literally came out around the same time that Sid Meier's Pirates came out, and it just is Sid Meier's Pirates, but just with a brown coat on it. It's like Sid Meier's Pirates covered in mud. Svi Rika, on the other hand, focused on Swedish history, and it would ultimately inspire Crusader Kings. It simulated political and cultural historical events in Northern Europe from 1523 to 1818, and it was based on a board game called CGB. Then came Dragonfire: The Well of Souls, which was the last game from Target Games before they went defunct in 1999. So there's times throughout this episode where we'll talk about a game where they are developing it under one company and then they continue and publish the game under another company. And Dragonfire: Wells of Souls is that type of game. So it is considered a game that was developed by Target Games. However, it would go on to get published under the Paradox Entertainment banner. So what ends up happening is that in 1999, Target Games would have some issues with their money, and they would end up having to declare bankruptcy, and they would have to restructure. Dragonfire: Well of Souls would get released after that restructuring happens, and Dragonfire is an action RPG that's set in the Drakkar Och Demor universe, specifically the campaign world of Ereb Eltor. It has pre-rendered isometric graphics and an RPG style that makes it just feel like the Swedish version of Baldur's Gate, which also came out around the exact same year. So they were definitely inspiring each other throughout the world. So during this, back to kind of talking about like what happened with Target Games, is they split off their video game division into a brand new entity called Paradox Entertainment, who would ultimately be the ones that would publish Dragonfire: The Well of Souls. And now this new branch focused on video games based on Target's properties, because they had Dragons and Demons, they had Cult, they had Mutant, and all of these role-playing games that had multiple iterations of the games, spin-offs of the games, and they were trying to take these role-playing games and turn them to video games, which is what Paradox Entertainment was trying to do. Now, with their success with CGB, they started to think about grand strategy games. So between the years of 2000 and 2003, Paradox Entertainment kind of laid the groundwork for the grand strategy titles that would really truly define them today. They would really dive into the 4X genre, explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, even before it was defined as a 4X strategy type of game. During the 2000s to 2003s, they would go on to release Europa Universalis in 2000, followed by Hearts of Iron in 2002, Victoria and Empire Under the Sun in 2003, and then finally Crusader Kings in 2004. Now, Crusader Kings would be released after another split with the company that we'll talk about pretty soon, but these games would then go on to establish Paradox's reputation for a deep, historical, rich strategy games that they would release. And not everything was smooth sailing for Paradox. They faced several bumps along the way, including some releases that didn't hit the mark. One significant setback was the cancellation of Magna Mundi. It was a free-to-play MMO FPS, which they had roughly about 30 developers that they would end up having to lay off because they would cancel the game, which laying off 30 developers was quite a blow, since the rest of their single-player game division was 7 people. So
ouch.
It's just, So like the guys who are putting out like Crusader Kings, who are releasing Europa Universal, Hearts of Iron, all these games are coming out, 7 people. They had 30 people tied up with the development of the MMO that they had to let go, and that just really disrupted the company pretty significantly.
Now, around 2003, Paradox Entertainment shifted focus, acquiring franchises like Conan the Barbarian and Solomon Kane. They brought in Frederick Wester to help elevate the studio to AAA status. Wester warned the board that achieving this would be challenging, given their recent struggles and project failures. Ultimately, the board decided it wasn't worth the investment and planned to close the video game division to focus solely on licensing out their IPs. But Wester saw potential, and teaming up with CEO Theodore Berquist, bought out the video game division. They retained Paradox Development Studio, including the original 7 developers, and acquired all rights to the past games, officially launching Paradox Interactive 20 years ago in 2004.
Right. However, this is the time period where there is a Paradox Interactive and also a Paradox Entertainment. And Paradox Interactive, under them, has a company called Paradox Development Studio. So there is now 3 different companies, all called Paradox something, with 2 of them being 2 separate companies.
Now, meanwhile, Paradox Entertainment moved to Los Angeles, focused on licensing properties like Conan the Barbarian, and became embroiled in rights disputes over the character. They retained ownership of the tabletop games and war games, but had no more connection to the video games. Now, in 2015, Frederick Malmberg, through his company Cabinet Holdings, bought Paradox Entertainment and rebranded it as Cabinet Entertainment. Terrible name. By 2018, Cabinet partnered with Funcom to create Heroic Signatures, focusing on video game adaptations of their franchises. Funcom had a history with Paradox Entertainment with Age of Conan, and in 2021 would just go on to buy out Cabinet Entertainment. This acquisition, combined with Tencent's 9.12 stake in Paradox Interactive and ownership of Funcom, technically brings the 2 Paradox companies back under one roof, albeit with a 9.12 stake of a roof of Paradox Interactive.
It's true. I just think it's wild that this company spun off like 20 years ago. They spun off, and now, like, as of 3 years ago, they're like kind of vaguely shoved under the same roof again. Right. And multiple name changes and all sorts of confusion. The confusion runs pretty deep, to the point where on Steam I was reading some comments about Age of Conan and the video game, and somebody said, well, you know, Conan stuff's in public domain, and somebody's like, no, Paradox owns it. But on Steam, it just looked like they were talking about Paradox Interactive, which had nothing to do with it. And because they were talking about Paradox Entertainment is what they were referring to, which really didn't do video games. So I just like that they were having this video game conversation about a licensor that they thought was somebody else. It just confusing. It confused the hell out of everybody.
Now, if you don't mind jumping in your time machine and traveling back to Sweden in the year of 2004, Paradox Interactive, now separate from Paradox Entertainment, was gearing up for the release of Crusader Kings. But just 2 months before launch, their publisher, Strategy First, filed for bankruptcy, leaving Paradox without a North American distributor and missing out on sales of the North American market. The setback inspired Frederick Wester to pursue digital distribution, taking a cue from Steam's now growing storefront. Paradox started by selling downloadable content for Victoria, and in 2006 launched Paradox On Demand, a store where fans could buy all Paradox games, and it was an expanding catalog. This evolved into what is called Gamersgate, not to be confused with Gamergate. Gamersgate is a platform that eventually offered games from third-party developers as well. Wester admitted that some of the initial games on Gamersgate were bad. In fact, he said, quote-unquote, terribly bad. But there were gems like Mountain Blade that became hits. Gamersgate felt like Paradox's own version of Steam, catering to fans of a niche historical strategy game genre.
I just think it's just very funny that it's just like Paradox was trying to be like the weird strategy version of Valve.
Yeah.
And also, this laid the groundwork with the selling of the DLC for Victoria. This laid the groundwork to Paradox's pretty much their financial strategy for many of their quote-unquote endless games, like Crusader Kings 3, where they just develop DLCs forever. And if you try to buy, like Crusader Kings 3 or like City Skyline, there's just like, do you want to buy the 400 DLCs that go with it as well? And you have to be like, I don't know. And Paradox really owned into this. In 2008, Paradox Interactive would go on and spin off Gamersgate off as a separate entity. And Gamersgate still exists today and still sells games today. Now, meanwhile, Paradox Interactive continued acquiring new titles to help fund their in-house strategy games. By 2013, Paradox had grown from a team of just 7 to a company of 100, a far cry from its humble beginnings of 7 developers when they left Paradox Entertainment. And by this time, Paradox Interactive had become a significant publisher, supporting numerous smaller studios and discovering major hits like Magica from Arrowhead Studios, their first game to sell 1 million copies. Which I think is funny because not even Crusader Kings would go on to, like, Magica beat all of their first party stuff to 1 million copies.
Right.
The team was also noticing a trend that their ambitious projects and kind of greenlighting everything as the publisher often led to missed deadlines and launches with a lot of bugs. So in 2014, they made a commitment to have more rigorous quality control for both in-house and third-party games that they were publishing, and Crusader Kings 2 was among the first game to be held to the higher standards, setting a new precedent. So the games are just now confusing. They're not buggy. They run well, but so that's something that they implemented. Now, one of Paradox's most successful partnerships began in 2011 with Colossal Order, the studio behind Cities in Motion. But Colossal Order had a bigger goal in mind, and that was to challenge EA's SimCity. Initially, Paradox hesitated to greenlight a city simulator by them, giving EA's dominance in the city building market, and they assumed the competition would just edge them out. But 2013 rolled around, and EA launched their new SimCity, and it did not do well. It fell flat. There was online service requirements, change in gameplay, and people were generally pissed with the new SimCity. So Paradox turned around to Colossal Order and said, "Hey, didn't you have a city idea?" And they said, "Yep." And they said, "You go ahead and do it. We'll pay for it." They greenlit Colossal Order to make their project. And the result was that Colossal Order put out a game called Cities Skyline. So they released City Skylines in 2015, and by 2022, about 7 years, sold over 12 million copies. Because people were mad at SimCity. I remember when SimCity came out in 2013 and people were pissed.
Yeah. That game was historically a mistake.
Yeah, and then these angels on high came out and were like, "Here's City Skylines," and everyone was happy. And Paradox was just pocketed that fat stack of cash. Now, Paradox Interactive also ventured into publishing with Obsidian Entertainment and released both the crowdfunded project of Pillars of Eternity and their vague follow-up game Tyranny, which is it's just a different game that they released. Tyranny is great. I love Tyranny. I like Pillars of Eternity. They're both very good. I did stumble across an article while doing some research for this episode about how Paradox Interactive buckets their games. And they bucket their games with, like, here are games that we feel did really well. Here are games that we like to call our endless games. These are our games that we just continue to develop content for forever.
Yeah.
There's 5 of those games. And then Crusader Kings 3 is one of them. And then they're like, here are games that we ultimately didn't really Like, it was break even for us, and then here are games that failed. So Pillars of Eternity is actually a break even game for them. However, Tyranny is actually a game that they made money on. However, now that Obsidian is owned by Microsoft, and if another Tyranny game comes out, it won't be published by Paradox. It'll be published by Microsoft. In 2014, they expanded with a new studio called Paradox Arctic, which would be staffed by employees from EA DICE and Starbreeze Studio. And in 2016, Paradox would go public with the intent of having both employees and players own a stake in the company. However, Friedrich Wester retained a controlling 33.3% share through his investment company and continued to maintain direction and control of the company. Their growth continued with, in 2017, they launched Paradox Thalassic, a studio focused on mobile games. And then by that time, Paradox had already grown to 300 employees. Wester at this moment stepped down as CEO, and Ebba Jungert took over as CEO, and Wester would remain as the executive chairman. During Ebba's reign, she would open 2 more studios, Paradox Tectonic, which was headed up by a Sims 2 veteran by the name of Rod Humble, who ended up launching and working on the project Life by You, which would ultimately get canceled, and Paradox Tinto, which was led by Johan Andersson, who had worked on most of their grand strategy games, and was a Crusader Kings 2 guy and Europa and all those type of games that they've made. On September 1st, 2021, the CEO Ebba Jungert would go on to resign over strategic differerences, and Friedrich Wester would return as CEO. And by the end of the month, Paradox would have canceled 15 in-progress projects, reaffirming a commitment to strategy and simulation games. And shortly after this, in 23 and in 24, Paradox would streamline even further, and they would divest from Paradox Arctic, Paradox Thalassic, Harebrained Schemes that worked on the Lamplighter, and Paradox Tectonic. They've all closed those studios. Some of the them like Harebrained Schemes, they actually got into an arrangement where Harebrained Schemes could just go back to being independent and they didn't have to be owned by Paradox anymore. So they just left. They didn't like fold them and collapse them, fire everybody. They just divested. They just said, if you guys can work together and sell a product by yourself, that's great. We just don't want to work with you anymore. And we're not going to pay you anymore. So now today, Paradox operates 5 internal studios. Paradox Development Studio, they're the main studio. Paradox Tinto, which is the one that's led by Johan Anderson. Triumph Studios, Playrion Game Studios, and Iceflake Studios. Each one of them generally are running a very specific type of game. So like their Triumph Studios handles all the Age of Wonders games, and that's kind of like how they split those games up. Since 1997, they have published 112 games, 33 of them being developed in-house. So they have produced quite a significant amount of work, which is why I didn't really want to in this episode. We've already gone on a lot about Paradox. I didn't really want to break out and talk about their specific games in this episode because they just have so much to unpack. So I really wanted to give a good baseline of history of where they came from and why they're so kind of weird in regards to like spinning off here, closing here, buying here. I like a lot of Paradox's games. There is also some controversy out there in regards to how they treat their employees. Some of them, there's been talk about some of the like workplaces being pretty like cold and like kind of striving for profits over people, as it were. So I think that's part of how the game industry is impacted a lot of crunch. And I think hopefully with Paradox kind of canceling a lot of their projects, that maybe that will hopefully alleviate some of the burden that their employees are feeling, though inevitably they probably also unburden themselves of employees. So, which is always not good.
Well, that'll do it for Paradox.
It's a fun company.
I think so. They're kind of interesting, and I'm not as familiar with Crusader Kings, I think, as you are, but definitely gets me interested in wanting to try to play some Crusader Kings. If there's one thing that I know countries like Sweden are good at, it's making video games that are complicated but cool.
Yeah. Crusader Kings 3 is definitely a fun game to play, as well as City Skylines is, I think, the game that I'm going to try and get into.
Now, getting us into the retro rewinds, I'm going to go first. Seth had me play Codename Iceman for MS-DOS. It's a Sierra adventure game released in March of 1990. It plays similarly to other late 80s, early 1990s Sierra adventure games. So if you're familiar with Space Quest or Police Quest, you're familiar with Codename Iceman. It has its CGA graphics, beautiful Sound Blaster music, point and click, controls. It's a Sierra adventure game. I don't know what else to say. I ran the game in Scum. For some reason, Scum actually struggled with it. I don't know if it's because I had the game running through Exodus through Scum, and that was causing some type of lag, but occasionally the Scum engine would just crash on me. But beyond that, I was still able to explore a bit of the island you start out on and interact with stuff. The game has you playing as a spy named Johnny Westland, who is also known as Iceman. He's called from his vacation on Tahiti to go on a secret mission to stop the Soviets, which involves a nuclear submarine that you get to be on at one point, which is cool. The game, as mentioned, plays like other Sierra adventure games. So you're collecting objects, you're walking around, you're talking to people, you get that score at the top that apparently means something, though I'm never quite sure what it means, but it's always there in all the Sierra games where it's 0 out of 600 when you start. And then you might finish the game at 480 out of 600 somehow. It's like when you do something, it will just give you an arbitrary point value. But yeah, if you like games like Police Quest, you like, King's Quest, Space Quest, you probably would like Codename Iceman. I did see some people giving it negative reviews, which I think it was just because it was a more contemporary review. Was the person was like, yeah, it's like a Sierra game. It was boring, but I thought it was okay. It holds up. Next week, though, Seth, I want you to play Young Merlin for the Super Nintendo.
Great. Zach had me play Predator 2 for the Sega Genesis, developed by Perfect 10 Productions and released in 1992 as a tie-in for the movie of the same name, Predator 2. Now, Predator 2 is a top-down action game where you play as Danny Glover's character from the movie. The game is pretty fun with a lot of fast-paced action as you walk through the level shooting bad guys and saving hostages. In the first stage, you kill a variety of drug dealers and confiscate narcotics, which causes a big red circle to appear on the screen that says Drug Squad. Later, you encounter the Predator, because this is in fact a game based on a movie that involves the Predator. The game has an almost Smash TV twin stick vibe to it and is fairly entertaining movie tie-in. Overall, I think it holds up beyond that the content may be a little dated because Predator 2 is an old movie.
Yeah.
Next week, Zach, you could play Cyborg Justice for the Sega Genesis.
I will. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to Classic Gaming Brothers. If you have any thoughts on Paradox and their bizarre history, send us an email at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it iHeartRadio, iTunes, or Podbean. We're available on all the social media apps, Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram. Be sure to find us, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're available. And we're also available on, of course, our website, classicgamingbrothers.com, home to the Classic Gaming blog, which is our new blog that Seth has painstakingly put together single-handedly because I haven't written anything for it yet.
Well, I've only written 2 articles.
Well, that's more than one. So with
That's
that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.
That's right.